A short pluck of the string broke the silence, and at that moment the blind lute player realized that the floor was shaking not from footsteps, but from someone else's fear. The duel was a sham, and the honor of both knights was at stake. I welcome the audience and thank you for your attention. Please write in the comments where you are watching this video from. I hope you enjoy listening. A Lutenist named Sava appeared in the city in early autumn, when the leaves were just beginning to turn yellow and the market square smelled of damp clay, dried fish, and fresh flour. He was brought there by a boy from a monastery almshouse who arranged for Sava to play in the evenings at a tavern near the city gates. The tavern owner believed that music added courage to wine, and that a blind musician, if he played from the heart, could bring together the poor, the knights, and the merchants. Sava accepted copper coins, listened to footsteps and voices, and distinguished the mood of the room by the breathing. He was accustomed to distinguishing how the walls responded to laughter, how the tables clattered when mugs were placed on them angrily, and how the floor echoed with the secret agreements that the kitchen mistress whispered in anguish. News came to the city of an old feud between knights. One was called Lambert. He was proud, wore a dark blue cloak, and held his back as if the sky were resting on it. The other was called Edgar. He did not like crowds, rarely laughed, and often chose corners where he could stand and not get in the way. Their dispute had been going on for years and concerned an inheritance that ordinary people knew little about, but they knew the main thing. Because of the disputed lands, many poor peasants lost the right to graze their cattle by the stream, and were angry at both of them for this. So the people waited to see how it would end. When the duel was announced, the square came alive, as if it were a fair day. No one expected mercy. Everyone was waiting for a spectacle. Sava sat down on a stool by the wall and checked the tension of the strings. He had an instrument repaired from different parts, and each string remembered its former life. He loved to hear how the lute sounded in a new place. Here, by the stone fence, the sound went into the archway and came back as a narrow echo. Sava noted this to himself, like a miller notes the movement of the millstone. Before the duel, the seconds came out onto the square. In the city, they were known as people who could say one thing, think another, and do a third. They convinced everyone that their cause was justice and order. They brought a chest with a seal, where 2 identical sets of armor and swords lay. Everything seemed fair. Each knight would get his share, and no one would say that he had been cheated. But while Sava was tuning his instrument, he felt the floor beneath his feet shake strangely. The tremor was like that of a heavy jug of water that someone had placed not where the floor was solid, but where there was a hidden niche. He put his hand on the boards and realized that right behind him, under the floorboards, there was a void, and above the void lay a heavy weight. When one of the seconds leaned over the chest, Sava heard a dry creak that was unlike the creak of wood. This creak is made by leather when it is stretched too tightly, or by tin when it is squeezed between the fingers. He realized that the swords had been switched. One sword was balanced at the hilt. The other had a hidden insert that shifted the balance closer to the tip. Such a sword is easier to pierce a plate with, but it pulls the hand away if the fighter is not used to it. Sava played a simple melody and adjusted to the noise of the crowd. He noticed Lambert's second lightly touched the hilt of the sword in the chest, while Edgar's second looked away and pretended to be interested in the judge's pen. The floor responded with a tremor in time with the slight rustle as the object with the insert changed position. Sava couldn't see it, but he could hear the air changing. He put down his lute, stood up, and tapped the board with his cane. The crowd fell silent. He said that the floor was whispering about foul play. He said that the trembling indicated that the weapons were of different weights, and that the second was crushing the other's honor like a boot crushing a crust of bread. His words angered many. The second's servants began to say that he was blind and could not see. Sava replied that he did not see with his eyes, but he heard the truth because the floor had no reason to lie. The judge ordered the swords to be checked. The check showed that one sword was indeed half a measure heavier than the other. The crowd began to buzz. The seconds tried to excuse themselves, saying that it was an accident, that the blacksmith had made a mistake. The blacksmith was summoned. The blacksmith said that he had not done such a thing. He showed his mark on identical blades, and on the heavy blade the mark had been forged with a silver insert. The seconds cowered. The duel was postponed until the next day. Lambert and Edgar were called to peace. Both stood with stony faces. Each understood that the second had not protected his honor, but had protected someone else's interests. That evening, Sava returned to the tavern and sat down by the stove. The landlady brought him porridge and said that people in town were talking about him as if he were blind. Sava replied that it would be better if they talked about him as someone who listens without malice. The landlady smiled and brought him a piece of fish. The boy from the almshouse, the same one who had brought Sava to the city, reported that a strange man in a cloak, without a coat of arms, had come to the lute player. The man said he wanted to talk in private. Sava nodded. He was not afraid. He was not. He understood that after his intervention, he would have both friends and enemies. The man without a coat of arms turned out to be a merchant. He said that he transported felt and salt, and that 10 years ago he had seen a woman who looked like Maria from the suburbs, who worked in the Baroness's house and had disappeared. He said he had a letter from that woman in which she asked him to give her son a sign. He couldn't find the boy at the time and kept the letter. He heard that a blind musician had appeared in the city and decided that the blind man would have a better chance of getting where the merchant would not be allowed. He asked Sava to find out who kept the old records in the abbey on the hill. He said he was willing to pay, and that there was more at stake in this matter than just knightly honor. Sava did not like other people's secrets, but he understood that the thread here led to the same place as Lambert and Edgar's steps. He agreed, but asked not for gold, but for protection, for the boy from the almshouse, and for the old laundress, who often gave him bread. The merchant nodded. Thus, an unexpected benefactor entered Sava's life, one who sought not glory, but a way out of someone else's misfortune. Sava went up to the abbey. Books, genealogical records, and lists of taxes were kept there. The archivist brother was silent, but his hands were honest. He said he remembered the name Maria and remembered how she used to come with a baby in her arms in those years. He added that there had been a lot of resettlement in the city at that time, because one of the lords had swapped his vassals around so that their power would not grow in one place. Sava asked permission to listen to the creaking of the wooden floor in the archive. The archivist was surprised, but did not forbid it. Sava walked around the room, marking with his cane where the boards were empty, where there were niches under them, where there were rolled-up scrolls and chests. He found a place where the floor responded with a dull note. They usually put jugs of water there to keep the paper moist. Now there was an empty vessel there. Sava realized that it had been moved recently. He asked the archivist to tell him who had been there. The archivist said that a scribe from the Baroness's house had recently come and asked to see the records of the lands by the stream. Sava learned that the scribe was connected with the same people who had arranged the duel. Sava began to play more often at the tavern by the gate. He searched the crowd for the footsteps of those who were hiding the truth. He heard silence fall on the last note, and in that silence he could hear the anxiety of others. One evening a messenger entered the tavern and brought a package for Sava. The messenger said it was a gift from a music lover. The owner nodded, thinking it was a normal thank you. Sava took the package and felt it with his palm. The paper was rough, and underneath it was leather stretched too tightly. He realized that it was not just a bag, but a woven shell with a thin plate under the seam. He tapped the table carefully with his cane. The table responded with a dull thud. Sava asked the cook to bring a bowl of water. He lowered the package into the water. The paper got wet, and a thin needle came out from inside. So a regular package turned the evening into a quiet thriller. The old laundress crossed herself. The owner cursed. Sava said that someone wanted him to shut up. He asked everyone not to touch the needle so that it could be shown to the judge. The next day, the merchant returned. He said he had learned something new. He had found a man who had seen Lambert's second at the salt yard warehouse, where iron was stored at night. He added that one of Edgar's squires often visited the town midwife, and that there was a connection between the two that no one spoke of aloud. The merchant gave Sava the sign that the woman Maria had promised. It was a small wooden cross with a twig carved inside. Sava ran his finger over the pattern and realized that it was not just a pattern but a family mark. He remembered how once, in the crowd at the gate, he heard Edgar quietly stroking the hilt of his sword with his brush, and on the hilt was the same twig, only in metal. He realized that the thread led to a hidden kinship. That evening, Sava sat down by the city wall and began to play a melody that people listen to when they want to understand whether old promises are still alive. A young man approached him, breathing heavily. The young man said that he served as a scribe for the Baroness, and that he had been ordered to burn the birth records from the monastery archives. He said that he couldn't bear to do it and hid some of the scrolls. He asked for advice on what to do. Sava said that he should bring the scrolls to the judge and the abbot of the abbey, but do so in such a way that they would not be taken away. He suggested going at night through an earthen embankment, where there was an inconspicuous hole in the wall that the blind dogs of the monastery courtyard used when chasing cats. The young man agreed. They agreed that he would bring the scroll disguised as a rind of cheese, which was often bought for the tavern kitchen. The plan worked. The scrolls found their way to the abbot, and from there to the judge. It turned out that many years ago, Maria had given birth to a son by the same lord who had recognized Lambert as a knight. The boy was secretly given to the house of a vassal and registered as his nephew. This boy grew up and became the knight Edgar. Thus, a hidden kinship was revealed, one that no one wanted to notice because it interfered with the interests of the powerful. The judge understood that the struggle for land was not only a struggle for pastures, but also for the right to recognition. The seconds pressed their lips together. The crowd whispered. Lambert and Edgar were summoned to the cathedral courtyard. At noon, 2 identical swords were laid out in the square. The judge said that the duel now had a different meaning. He said that truth was more precious than blood, and that there was more honor in recognition than in wounding. Lambert stood as if listening to distant thunder. Edgar looked at the ground. Sava sat down again by the wall. He placed the lute on his knees and ran his fingers over the strings. He did not need to see their faces. He could hear the brothers breathing, who had not yet called each other that. He could hear the stones warming in the sun, and the boards under his feet telling him that no one would fall on them today. Sava told the judge that the floor was shaking strangely again. He explained that there was a jug full of small stones in the far corner of the wall, and that if he leaned on it, it would tip over and distract attention. He added that at that moment it would be possible to replace the scrolls with fake ones. He asked for the jug to be removed. The judge nodded and ordered a servant to move the vessel. Underneath the jug, they found a hiding place with new forged papers. Edgar's second paled. Lambert's second tried to leave. The crowd began to murmur. At that moment, the Baroness entered the gate. She brought with her blacksmiths, scribes, and 2 shepherds, who grazed their cattle near the disputed stream. The Baroness told the judge that she was ready to sign a new agreement, according to which the shepherds would return the right to water, and the land would be considered common until the autumn harvest, after which the new council would decide how to divide it. She added that she would pay for the oath from her own chest because she was tired of counting other people's tears. No one expected the rich woman to become an unexpected benefactor. She did not like Lambert, did not respect Edgar, and yet decided that the common good was more important than their pride. The townspeople became noisy, and the shepherds cried quietly and joyfully. Sava played, and the sound, high and long, filled the courtyard. He heard the crowd's breathing change. He felt that the city was ready to listen further. He understood that not everything had been revealed yet. He knew that everyone had a stone up their sleeve that could be thrown into the water to muddy it. He prepared himself for his enemies to strike in a different way. He did not forget about the package with the needle. He knew that they wanted to make him disappear. But he had a new ally in the Baroness, and an old one in the merchant. He had simple friends, a cook, a laundress, and a boy from the almshouse. He felt their steps growing stronger. At night, Sava walked through the narrow streets. He always believed that the night spoke more honestly than the day. During the day, people hold back their words, but at night, their steps speak for themselves. He stopped at the back door of the salt warehouse. Those who did not want to be seen often met there. Sava crouched down, put his palm on the ground, and felt a slight ripple, as if 2 cats had walked across the stone. In fact, 2 men had passed by. One leaned more heavily on his left leg, the other carried the keys to the gate on his belt. Sava realized that one of them was the second, and the other was the city clerk's servant. He heard them open the hiding place, shift the scrolls, and the stones rustle. Then he heard the sound of a scabbard against stone, but no weapon was drawn. They left the trap for a morning check. Sava got up and walked back, choosing streets where even the dogs slept soundly. In the morning, new papers were brought to the court. They stated that Maria had acknowledged a child not to the Lord recorded in the monastery, and that her signature was confirmed by a seal that no one had seen. The judge frowned. The abbot took the scroll and ran his finger along the edge. He said that the seal was softer than it should be, and that there was a barely noticeable crack on it that had not been there during the previous inspection. Sava asked permission to touch the ribbon. He ran his fingers along the wax and said that under the ribbon there was a thin layer of leather, covering another seal. He asked for some water. He moistened the edge and peeled off the leather. Underneath was the real seal, which confirmed the previous inscription. Thus, the forgery was exposed. The second and the servant tried to flee, but the guards managed to close the gate. Lambert approached Edgar. Both stood silently. Sava heard one man in the crowd say to his neighbor that he never thought that the two proud men would turn out to be brothers, and that all this time they had been walking from the same house. The other replied that this was a lesson for everyone who liked to argue more than listen. The crowd accepted this new knowledge. Rumors hurt, but the truth hurt deeper and healed more slowly. Sava continued to play and waited for them to make their choice. In the evening, new guests arrived at the tavern. They were travelers from faraway places who knew Sava from the fairs. They said they had once seen him by a cold river, where he saved a drunk fisherman simply by hearing the water hitting the rocks. They said Sava had ears like a dog and patience like a miller. They asked him to play a song about peace. Sava did not like loud words. He played a melody that many called a lullaby, and which he himself considered a prayer without words. There was no room in this melody for duels or lawsuits. It was the steady beat of the heart, and the quiet steps along a smooth path. Meanwhile, the merchant found a boy from the almshouse and took him to the Baroness. He asked for a place for the boy in the kitchen. The Baroness agreed. She said that the kitchen was the heart of the house, and that the heart must be able to listen. So the boy, who had been living on the mercy of random people, got a roof over his head and a job. He helped cut herbs and listened to the pot simmering on the stove. He often ran to Sava and brought him bread. Sava was happy for him. He believed that this was how things should be. The strong lift up the weak, and the weak teach the strong patience. Lambert and Edgar were invited to the Baroness. She said she was ready to accept their oath to the new order by the stream. She added that her house was old and did not like empty cries. She offered them a choice: either recognize the brotherhood and divide the land, or continue the dispute until winter, risking leaving the peasants without water. She looked at them as a mother looks at children who have outgrown boyish fights but still hold on to old grudges. They were silent. Sava sat by the wall at that hour, strumming his strings. He did not know what step they would take. He only hoped that their step would not shatter the fragile silence that had been built. At night, trouble came again. Someone had placed rotten straw and a spark in the Baroness's barn. There was little fire, but enough smoke to frighten people and livestock. A boy from the almshouse heard a cow bellowing low and hollow and ran to the barn. He saw the smoke and called for help. The cook grabbed a bucket. The guards poured water on the fire. The flames were quickly extinguished. In the corner, they found a piece of chain mail wrapped around a small jar of fragrant resin. It was a crude attempt at arson, but clever enough to distract the household from other matters. The merchant realized that while the house was putting out the fire, someone had broken into the record storage room. He ran there and saw the chest open. The tracks led to the back gate. There, the stones were still warm, as if after a frost, and the air smelled of resin. He realized that his enemies had not given up. By morning, the city woke up in alarm, and the judge ordered the guards to be reinforced. The abbot closed the archives. The Baroness asked Sava to stay in the house for a few days because the house needed someone who could hear without being distracted by visual deception. Sava agreed. He began to play in the courtyard in the morning and evening, listening to the house breathe. He memorized where a branch creaked, where a step was slightly different in size, where a board responded hoarsely because dust had long been falling under it. He created a map of sounds in his head, which he could follow without lifting his feet above his ankles. Once he heard footsteps in the distant corridor that were too soft, like those of a person who had learned to sneak. The footsteps stopped at the door of the room where the new scroll of the agreement was kept. Sava put down his lute and went there. He held a cane in his hands, but he used it not as a weapon, but as a language to talk to the floor. He tapped on the board by the door. The board responded with an empty sound. He realized that there was a void underneath it, and if he stepped on it quickly, it would bend and creak. He moved slowly until he was a step away from the door. At that moment, he heard someone inside shuffling papers, someone breathing, holding their breath so as not to give themselves away. Sava said that the house was asking the guest to leave honestly. He said it calmly, without threats. The person inside froze. Then there was a rustling sound, as if a mouse had fallen into flour. The door opened slightly. The same scribe from the Baroness's house who had previously saved some of the scrolls came out. His face was wet. He said that he had been intimidated, that he had been shown a knife and promised trouble for his sister. He said that he had not come to steal, but to check whether they had been replaced again. Sava understood that there was a lot of truth and a little cunning in this grief. He called the guards and asked them to bring the judge. The judge arrived quickly. He did not shout. He said that the scribe would not be punished if he gave the names. The scribe named the second, and the name of a merchant from a neighboring town who wanted not water from the stream, but the right to collect tolls from the road. Thus a web was woven that was difficult to break with a single blow, but it could be untangled with patience. Sava returned to his lute and again played the melody that kept the house in a steady rhythm. He thought about how different people in different years tuned their lives like strings on a lute. Some pulled too tight and broke. Others left them too loose and they went out of tune. It is difficult to find the middle ground, but if you find it, the house breathes without sudden jolts. Rumors of the canceled duel and the deception of the second spread throughout the neighborhood. At the fair, people argued about who was smarter, the blind musician or the judge. Some said that the music only distracted from the real issue, while others replied that without the music, no one would have heard the floor shaking, and therefore would not have noticed the deception. The blind Lutenist became the subject of controversy. Some disliked him out of envy, some feared him because of his hearing, and some respected him because he stood between swords and saved the honor of strangers. He himself thought that he was just lucky to be in the right place, where the floor spoke louder than usual, and the seconds did not make as much noise as honest people. The main thing remained to be understood. Would Lambert and Edgar acknowledge their kinship and be able to end the old feud themselves? Only their choice could decide that. No courts or music could replace a simple human step toward peace. Sava waited, as a miller waits for the wind. He knew that if there was no wind, he could turn the wings with his hands, but the flower would not be any better. He waited for an honest wind. The morning began with the quiet ringing of a bell. It was a monastery signal, not an alarm, but a request to gather. The abbot ordered the courtyard to be opened to all who cared about the outcome. So the town slowly flocked to the abbey. Shepherds, craftsmen, and apprentices sat on stone benches. Merchants stood in the shade. The Baroness took her place by the column. The judge came out, like a teacher coming out to children when he needs to explain a simple thing that'll make everything easier for everyone. He said that there would be no weapons today. He said that today only words were needed, but not quick ones, rather measured ones. He added that every word would be recorded. Sava sat a little to the side. He put his lute down next to him and listened. He could feel the stones beneath them, holding the warmth of the night. He heard sparrows arguing in the ivy. He was ready to intervene if he sensed lies again. He did not rush to the center. He knew that music, like a river, should flow around, not break. It was important to him that people take their own burden. Lambert spoke first. He said he was ready to acknowledge the monastery's record and was ready to help the shepherds during the harvest. He admitted the second's guilt and named him. He added that his pride was not more valuable than water for people. His voice trembled, but not from fear, but from the tension of a man who was stepping over a long-standing habit. Sava heard this and realized that the step had been taken. Then Edgar spoke. He said that he no longer wanted to fight for what did not belong to him alone. He admitted that he had been stubborn and deaf to the common cause. He said that if fate had given them one father, then they would have the strength to divide the land without bloodshed. The crowd sighed, not a cry, but a sigh, like when a heavy lid is lifted and a window is opened. The judge ordered the oath boards to be brought in. Lambert and Edgar placed their hands on them. At that moment, a man whom few expected to see emerged from the far aisle. He was an old knight who had long since retired to seclusion. He was known as sullen but honest. He said that he had once been a second in another duel, and that he had succumbed to pressure from the rich. He said that he had been tormented by this all his life, and had come so that it would not happen again. He offered his land near the neighboring forest to a common shepherding fund, so that people would have somewhere to drive their cattle if the stream dried up. This was yet another unexpected benefactor who intervened with a single decision. His action broke the remaining mistrust. The shepherds wept openly. The Baroness approached and put her hand on his shoulder. The judge recorded the donation. It seemed that everything had been settled, but every long story has a twist. A man with a birthmark on his temple flashed through the crowd. His name was Oswald. He was considered a master of dirty deeds. He knew how to make fake seals and bribe the judge's servants. He disappeared during the commotion and returned when everyone had relaxed. He approached the Baroness and raised his hand as if to ask for mercy. Sava did not see it, but he heard Oswald's footsteps sink into the ground. Those who do not ask walk like that. Those who want to throw grain into the flames and leave walk like that. Sava's palm found the string on its own. He struck the chord short and sharp. The sound made many turn around. Oswald recoiled, but it was too late. The guards were already looking at him, and the boy from the almshouse, now a kitchen assistant, noticed the glint of a thin dagger at Oswald's belt. He, the boy whom no one had noticed before, ran up and grabbed his sleeve. Oswald jerked, but lost his balance. The dagger fell. The guards managed to subdue the attacker. Thus, the underestimated hero became a triumphant figure. The crowd chanted his name. The Baroness later ordered that he be rewarded with an apprenticeship with a gunsmith, because the boy had quick eyes and a brave heart. Oswald was questioned. He said that he had been paid by merchants from a neighboring town who wanted to collect tolls from the road. He added that his role was a small part of a larger plan, and that he had not expected resistance from the boy or the music. He said he thought people would get tired of heavy conversations and let him slip away. He was wrong. Sava thought about how much in this story depended on hearing, which many considered a useless gift. He was blind, but he heard the floor tremble, he heard voices tremble, he heard the silence tremble. Silence trembles when lies are placed within it. He learned a lot from his lute. The lute does not tolerate rudeness. If you touch it roughly, it responds dully. If you speak to it evenly, it responds evenly. So do people. A few days later, the city was already living a new life. Shepherds grazed their cattle by the stream without fear of being chased away. The guards at the salt warehouse were replaced. The judge replaced 2 clerks. The Baroness organized a gathering for the poor at her home. The merchant who started the chain of events prepared for his journey and visited Sava before leaving. He said that the promise had been fulfilled. The boy was under protection, and the laundress was receiving bread. He said that Sava had done more for the city than a dozen soldiers, and that it was both ridiculous and fair at the same time. Sava smiled. He replied that he had simply listened to what was already there. He said that he had nothing to be proud of except his patience. The merchant shook his hand and left. Lambert and Edgar met without witnesses by the old willow tree at the edge of the pasture. They talked for a long time. Only the birds knew what they talked about. But from the way they walked back, it was clear that they were not enemies. Their steps became the same, like the steps of 2 people who felt common ground beneath their feet. Not only Sava saw this, many saw it. So the city received a lesson that it did not immediately understand, but accepted with its body. In those days, Sava continued to play. People approached him and asked him to tell them how he heard lies in the trembling of the floor. He explained simply. He said that lies are heavy. They weigh down in unexpected places. Where the floorboards are weak, they give themselves away. He said that the truth is lighter, but sharper, around the edges. He added that not every sound is a sign, and not every tremor should be considered proof. He repeated that it is not the sound that decides, but conscience. The sound only calls conscience to help. Sava began to visit the abbey more often. The abbot sometimes asked him to sit in the archive while the brother checked the records. Sava sat, played quietly, and listened to the rustling of the scrolls. He did not like power, but he respected order. He understood that his gift was not about power, but about limits. He could stop injustice in one room. That was enough. The world was too big to hold with one song. One evening he went out onto the city wall. The wind was steady and warm. Children were playing Ring Around the Rosie in the square. The smell of fried turnips and onions wafted from the kitchen. The Baroness was walking by with 2 maids and stopped to listen. She did not say anything loud, but through her steward she gave Sava a small house on the edge of town, so that he would not have to rent a room and depend on the whims of the innkeeper. It was a quiet gift, without fanfare or pomp. Thus the Baroness proved herself a benefactor for the 3rd time. She understood the town better than some priests. She knew who needed a roof over their head and when, and who needed a kind word and when. Sava moved into the house. He placed his lute by the window, where the sun's rays fell on the strings. He kept his cane nearby, which he loved as much as many people love their dogs. He often invited a boy from the former almshouse to visit. They sat by the hearth, and Sava told him that every instrument was alive and needed to be fed, not only with strings, but also with silence. He said that silence was the best food for music. The boy laughed and brought bread. They ate and listened to the house breathe. The seconds were punished. One was sent to work on monastery buildings, the other to salt works. It was not a cruel sentence, but it was a tangible one. They did not lose their lives, but they lost their fingers of power. The judge believed that they should be taught a useful trade. He believed that a man who carries stones better understands the value of hard work. The city accepted this. The people did not demand blood. The city breathed a sigh of relief. It was tired of the waves of anger. It wanted calm seas. Sava played at the gate again during the fair. Strangers passed by. They often asked him who he was and why he played, as if he could hear the earth itself singing along. He replied that he was born in a small place where there were few people but many sounds, and that he had learned to live not with his eyes, but with his ears, because it was easier to walk on an uneven path that way. He added that he was lucky because there were people nearby who did not refuse him a bowl of soup and the right to sit by the stove. He believed that every person had a duty to be someone's stove companion. Soon a new fair was announced, to which the neighboring lords were to come. The city was preparing. Lambert and Edgar were asked to represent the interests of the city. They accepted. It was a quiet victory over an old enmity. People noticed that now they spoke more evenly, without interrupting each other. They did not become friends in the sense that children are friends. They became people who were working together for a common cause. That was better. On the eve of the fair, Sava woke up before dawn. He heard a board creaking differently than before in the far corner of the house. He got up and felt for the box, where he kept an old note written on rough paper. Someone had moved it. He realized that someone had been in the house. He wasn't afraid. He took his lute and walked toward the city wall. He wanted to check if Oswald's men had returned. He heard a soft rustling on the wall. It was not a sneaking man or a dog. It was a bird tangled in the archer's net. He freed it. The bird flew away. The air was clear. He returned. The city was bustling at the fair. People were buying salt, felt, wool, and yarn. Children were chasing clay roosters. In the square stood a bench with jugs from new craftsmen. Around noon, Sava felt that the floor was shaking again, but not in the same way. He moved into the shade and listened. It was not a lie. It was fear. He followed the sound. There was a woman with a baby. The baby was crying, but not loudly, like tired children cry, but softly, like children cry when they feel cramped. Sava said there was a warm place nearby. He asked for a place on the bench and a bowl of soup for them. The innkeeper's wife served them. The woman said she was coming from a neighboring village and was afraid of the crowd. She calmed down. The floor stopped shaking as soon as the child fell asleep. Sava realized that not all tremors are a sign of evil. Sometimes it's just life. In the evening, the judge announced his gratitude to those who had helped the city in difficult times. He named the Baroness, the old knight, the merchant, and the abbot. He named the boy. Unexpectedly for everyone, he named the laundress, because she had fed the musician when he had nothing to eat, and thus started the chain. Thus the city recognized small acts of kindness as important as large ones. It was that very moral clarity without embellishment that many people lack, more often than bread. Sava returned to his little house. He sat by the window and ran his fingers over the strings. He remembered the day when a bundle with a needle was brought to the tavern. He remembered how the floor shook by the chest before the duel. He remembered how the boy held Oswald's sleeve. He thought that no one in this business was superfluous. Everyone was a string, and if one string did not sound, the music would be different. He did not like to lecture. He just lived as he knew how. He placed his fingers evenly so that the string sounded clear, and listened when the house asked for silence. He told himself that tomorrow he would go to the stream and listen to the water talking to the new stones that the shepherds had laid to strengthen the banks. He loved such sounds. There was no cunning in them. There was business in them. He believed that a person who hears water is less likely to say unnecessary things. The next day he went to the stream. The water flowed smoothly, the stones lay securely. The shepherds talked among themselves, the cows chewed grass. Lambert and Edgar stood on the bank. They discussed their plans for the winter. Their steps did not cling to the stones. They were not afraid of each other. Even a blind man could see that. Sava sat down on a log and began to play. He did not try to be beautiful. He honestly repeated the smooth flow of the water. The shepherds nodded to him, as they would nod to an acquaintance they see every day. It was a small victory for the city over itself. In the evening, Sava returned home, greeted the boy who now served the blacksmith, and went to bed. He dreamed that the floor in his house breathed evenly, without false tremors. He dreamed that the lute itself adjusted its strings to the wind. He dreamed that people had learned to hear each other without music. He woke up to a quiet light. He did not know that there would still be quarrels ahead, still attempts at deception, still harsh words. He only knew that he had enough patience and hearing for another day. That was enough. So the blind lute player once stopped a duel because he heard a lie in the trembling of the floor, and then saved the honor of both knights because he taught them to listen. He did not become a hero on coins, nor did he become a fear for the wicked. He remained a man with an instrument who had enough hearing for the misfortune of others and enough silence for the joy of others. The city remembered this not as a miracle, but as hard work. And hard work, if it is honest, always pays off. I think